You're not here because you're careless with money. If anything, you've tried. You've worked harder. You've stayed late. You've taken on more responsibility. Maybe you even got the raise you thought would finally change things. And for a moment, it felt like it might. Then something happened. The numbers improved. But the pressure didn't. The bank balance climbed, and somehow dropped just as fast. A bill you forgot. An expense you didn't expect. A decision that felt reasonable in the moment, but left you wondering later where it all went. And quietly, almost without noticing, you started to carry a thought you don't say out loud. Why does this still feel unstable? I've seen this pattern too many times to mistake it for bad luck. And if I'm being honest with you, this might be the part you don't want to hear at first. The problem is not your income. It's the machine your money is entering. Right now, whether you realize it or not, your financial life is operating on a system. Not a formal one, not something you designed, but a system nonetheless. Money comes in, it gets absorbed, it disappears, and then you reset. Month after month, year after year. I call this the invisible money machine, and most people never question it. They assume the answer is to pour more into it. More effort, more hours, more income, as if filling a leaking container faster will somehow fix the leak. It doesn't. It just makes the cycle more exhausting. Let me give you something simple to ground this. Imagine someone earning $4,500 a month. They live reasonably. They're not reckless. They pay their bills. They don't feel irresponsible. Then they get a raise to $5,800. On paper, that should change everything. But what actually happens? A slightly nicer apartment, a few more dinners out, maybe a car upgrade that feels deserved after years of work. Subscriptions that seemed small individually but stack over time. 6 months later, they're earning more than ever, and somehow, they feel exactly the same. Still watching their account. Still waiting for next month to feel easier. Still one unexpected expense away from stress. That's not a failure of discipline. That's a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Absorb everything. This is where most financial advice goes wrong. It focuses on behavior in isolation. Spend less, save more, try harder, without ever addressing the structure those behaviors are trapped inside. But structure is everything. Because here's the shift that changes everything. And I want you to sit with this for a moment. A salary tells you what you earn. A system determines what you keep, what you build, and whether your life ever actually gets easier. Those are not the same game, and most people spend their entire lives playing the first one. They optimize for income. They negotiate raises. They chase better opportunities. They work harder than ever. But they never stop to ask a more important question. What happens to money after it arrives? Because if nothing is waiting for it, no structure, no direction, no design, it doesn't matter how much comes in. It will leave. Quietly. Efficiently. Almost invisibly. And you'll be left wondering why progress always feels temporary. This audiobook is not about getting rich quickly. It's not about hacks or shortcuts or pretending money is just a mindset problem. It's about something much more practical and much more powerful. It's about redesigning the machine. We're going to look at how money actually moves through your life. Not just how it arrives, but how it behaves once it's there. We're going to talk about why smart, capable people still feel financially unstable. Why earning more often increases pressure instead of relieving it. Why your nervous system, yes, your body, is part of your financial life whether you realize it or not. And most importantly, how to build something that works even when you don't feel motivated. Because here's another uncomfortable truth. If your financial life only works when you are focused, disciplined, and at your best, then it doesn't work. Life will interrupt you. You will have tired weeks. You will make imperfect decisions. The goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to build something that survives you. Something that runs when you're distracted. Something that holds when life gets messy. Something that, over time, becomes quieter, more stable, less demanding. Until one day, you notice something strange. Money is no longer loud. It's no longer interrupting your thoughts every day. It's no longer something you constantly have to manage emotionally. It's just working in the background, supporting you. That's what we're building here. Not a number, not an image of success. A system that produces calm. And if you stay with this, really stay with it, you'll reach a point where the old way of thinking becomes impossible to return to. Because once you see how money actually works, you can't unsee it. So before we go any further, I want you to do one thing. Not a big change, not a full plan, just a small moment of honesty. Ask yourself, if nothing changed about how I manage money, where would I be in 3 years? Not where you hope, where your current system would realistically take you. Let that answer sit for a second, because that answer is the reason we're about to change everything. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1. The Paycheck Trap. You already know this feeling. You wake up, you work, you get paid, and then the cycle begins again. Nothing dramatic, nothing obviously broken, just a quiet repetition that never quite leads anywhere. At first, it feels responsible, stable even. You earn, you pay your bills, you handle what needs to be handled, you move forward. But if you're honest, and this is where most people hesitate, you're not really moving forward. You're maintaining. And there's a difference. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine someone earning $4,200 a month. Their rent is $1,400. Utilities, insurance, and essentials take another $1,000. Food, transportation, small comforts, another $1,200. By the time the month ends, they might have a few hundred left. Some months, nothing at all. Now here's the important part. This person is not irresponsible. They're doing what they were taught. Work, earn, spend, repeat. But that equation is incomplete because it answers one question very well. How do you survive? But it completely ignores another. How do you build anything beyond survival? This is the paycheck trap, and it's more subtle than people think. Because it doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like adulthood. It feels like doing things the right way. That's what makes it so effective. You can stay inside this pattern for years, decades even, without realizing that nothing is accumulating except effort. Here's the uncomfortable part. A paycheck is not progress. It's access. It gives you the ability to live. But it does not guarantee that anything will grow. And if that sounds harsh, it's only because most people have been told the opposite for so long. They've been told that if they just keep increasing their income, things will eventually work out. But I've watched people double their income and stay in the exact same position. Same stress, same dependence, just with slightly nicer expenses, because the structure didn't change. Only the scale did. This is where the shift begins. Not in your income, in how you think about what income is actually for. Most people treat income as something to consume, something that arrives and then gets used up by life. System thinking treats income differently. It treats income as raw material, something that needs direction, something that should be divided, assigned, and structured the moment it arrives, not after everything else has taken its share. That's the difference between salary thinking and system thinking. Salary thinking asks, "How much did I make this month?" System thinking asks, "What did my money actually do this month? Did it build anything? Did it reduce future pressure? Did it create options? Or did it simply pass through your life, unnoticed?" And this is where I want to say something you might resist at first. If nothing in your financial life is growing, no savings, no assets, no buffer, no system, then it doesn't matter how hard you're working. You are running in place. Not because you're lazy, because the structure you're operating inside only allows for maintenance. That's what the paycheck trap does. It keeps you busy enough to survive, but not structured enough to escape. Now, before you misunderstand this, let me be clear. There is nothing wrong with earning a salary. A stable income is one of the most valuable tools you have. But it is a tool, not a solution. And tools only work when you use them intentionally. Right now, your paycheck is entering your life the same way water enters sand. It spreads, it disappears, and then you wonder why nothing is left. But if you take that same water and build channels for it, suddenly it flows somewhere. Suddenly it fills something. Suddenly it becomes useful. That's what we're going to start doing. Not by changing how much you earn, but by changing what your money is allowed to do after it arrives. Because here's the truth. Most people discover too late. You don't escape financial stress by earning more. You escape it by breaking the pattern that keeps resetting you. And that pattern always starts here, with how you think about the paycheck. So I'll leave you with this question. When your next paycheck arrives, will it just pass through your life like the last one? Or will it finally have somewhere to go? Chapter 2. Money without direction disappears. Most people don't lose money in dramatic ways. It doesn't vanish in one bad decision. It doesn't collapse in a single moment. It dissolves. Quietly. And that's exactly why it's so hard to notice. You don't remember every small expense. You don't feel each transaction as it happens. There's no alarm that goes off when your money starts drifting away from you. It just happens. And by the time you look at your account, the only thing left is a vague question. Where did it go? This is what I call the drift effect. Money, when left without direction, doesn't stay still. It spreads. It follows convenience. It follows habit. It follows emotion. It follows whatever feels easiest in the moment. Not because you're careless, because that's how human behavior works. Let me ground this in something real. Imagine someone who earns $5,000 a month. They're not reckless. They don't make huge purchases. They don't see themselves as someone who wastes money. But over 30 days, this is what happens. $9 here for a subscription they forgot about. $18 for a quick delivery because they're tired. $6 for a coffee they didn't plan on. $42 for a dinner that wasn't that expensive. $120 for a weekend that felt deserved after a long week. None of these decisions feel wrong in isolation. That's the point. Individually, they are reasonable. Collectively, they are structural. By the end of the month, $700, sometimes $1,000, has disappeared into things that never felt like a decision. That's the drift effect. And here's the part most people miss. This is not a spending problem. It's a direction problem. Because when money has no assigned path, it will always find one. Just not one you chose. And this is where things get uncomfortable again. If you can't clearly say where your money went last month, not approximately, not generally, but specifically, then you are not in control of your financial life. You are observing it. That's a hard distinction. But it's an important one. Because observation feels passive. It feels like something is happening to you. Control, on the other hand, starts with visibility. And visibility requires something most people avoid. Looking, really looking. Not guessing. Not estimating. Not telling yourself a story that feels acceptable. Seeing it as it actually is. This is where the shift begins. Not with cutting anything. Not with restricting yourself. Just with clarity. For the next 30 days, every dollar that leaves your account needs to be seen. Not judged. Seen. Categorized. Understood. And when you do this, and if you do it honestly, you'll notice something surprising. Your money doesn't disappear randomly. It follows patterns. It gathers in certain areas. It repeats certain behaviors. And those patterns tell you something important. They show you where your system is missing. Because remember, money is like water. If you don't build channels, it will spread into the ground. And once it's there, you can't recover it. You can only build better channels for the next flow. Now here's the reframe that matters. Most people think control means restriction, that if they start tracking their money, they'll have to give things up. But real control feels different. It feels like awareness. It feels like knowing, not guessing. And when you know, something interesting happens. You naturally start making different decisions. Not because someone told you to. Because you can see the trade-offs clearly. That $18 delivery isn't just $18 anymore. It's part of a pattern. That subscription isn't just $9. It's something you forgot to choose. And slowly, without forcing anything, your behavior begins to shift. This is why tracking is not about discipline. It's about removing blindness. Because you cannot direct what you cannot see. And most people are trying to fix their finances while still operating in the dark. So before you try to optimize anything, before you try to earn more, before you try to invest or build or grow, answer this question honestly. Do you actually know where your money goes? Not where you think it goes, where it really goes. Because until you see that clearly, every other strategy you try will sit on top of the same invisible leak, and it will keep resetting you. On Chapter 3. Before more income, build a financial floor. There's a belief that feels so logical, most people never question it. If I just earned more, everything would be easier. And to be fair, part of that is true. More income gives you more room, more options, more flexibility, more potential. But here's where it quietly breaks down. If your financial life has no structure, more income doesn't create stability. It creates a larger version of the same instability, just with higher numbers. I've seen this happen over and over again. Someone earning $3,800 a month struggles. They feel tight. They tell themselves, once I hit $5,000, I'll finally be okay. Then they reach $5,000, and for a moment, it feels different. Until it doesn't. Because something else has changed too. Their lifestyle. Rent goes from $1,200 to $1,800 because it feels justified now. Their spending becomes less careful because there's more room. Small upgrades begin to stack. Better groceries, more eating out, subscriptions that used to feel unnecessary. but now feel harmless. 6 months later, they're earning more than ever, and they still feel fragile. That's not bad luck. That's the absence of what I call the financial floor. The financial floor is the minimum level of stability your life rests on. It's not about how high you can go. It's about how far you can fall without everything collapsing. And most people never build it. They try to grow upward before securing what's underneath them, which means every increase in income comes with an equal increase in risk, because nothing is holding them steady. Let me make this real. Imagine two people. Both earn $5,000 a month. Person A has no system. They spend freely within reason. They save occasionally when there's something left. Their fixed costs are high, and their margin is thin. Person B earns the same, but they've built a floor. They have a basic emergency buffer, maybe $3,000 to start. They've capped their fixed costs at a level that leaves breathing room. They automatically allocate a portion of income the moment it arrives. Same income, completely different experience. Person A feels constant pressure. Person B feels stable, not rich, not free yet, but steady. And that steadiness changes everything. Because when you have a floor, you stop reacting to money. You start working with it. You can absorb a bad month without panic. You can make decisions without urgency pushing you into the wrong choice. You can think beyond the next 30 days. And this is where I need to say something directly. If your current financial life feels unstable, the solution is not to increase your ceiling, it's to build your floor. Because without a floor, every increase in income simply raises your level of exposure. More money, same vulnerability. That's why so many people feel like they're always one step away from falling behind, no matter how much they earn. They've built a life that depends on constant performance, and that's exhausting. A strong financial floor removes that pressure. It creates a baseline where your life is supported even when things are not perfect. So what does that actually look like in practice? It's not complicated, but it does require intention. First, you define your essential survival number, not your ideal lifestyle, your actual baseline. What does it cost to keep your life functioning at a basic, stable level each month? Second, you create a buffer toward that number, even if it's small at first. $500, then $1,000, then more. The goal is not to feel rich. The goal is to feel less fragile. Third, you control your fixed costs. Because fixed costs are what lock you into a level of pressure. Once they rise, they're hard to bring back down. So every decision that increases your fixed monthly obligations should be treated carefully, not avoided, but understood. Because each one reduces your flexibility, and flexibility is what allows growth to happen safely. Now here's the reframe that matters. Most people chase income because they want relief, but relief doesn't come from more money. It comes from less exposure, from knowing that even if something goes wrong, you're not immediately in trouble. That's what the financial floor gives you. Not excitement, not status, something better. Calm. And once you have that, you'll realize something surprising. You don't need as much as you thought to feel okay. And from that place, that stable, grounded place, you can finally start building upward. Not desperately, not reactively, but deliberately. So ask yourself this, right now, if your income stopped for 1 month, what would happen? And more importantly, what would you need to build so that answer becomes less stressful over time? That's your real starting point, not your next raise. Your floor. Chapter 4. Give every dollar an assignment. Most people wait for money to tell them what to do. The paycheck arrives, and then the decisions begin. Bills first, then whatever feels necessary, then whatever feels justified. And if something is left at the end, you might save a little. That word, if, is where the entire system breaks. Because in real life, there is almost never anything left. Not because you lack discipline, because you're making decisions in the wrong moment. You're deciding what to do with money when it's already inside your life, when emotions are active, when fatigue is real, when convenience is tempting. And in that moment, the easiest decision almost always wins. That's why this chapter matters. Because the shift is simple, but it changes everything. Your money should already know where it's going before it arrives. I call this pre-decided money, and it's one of the most powerful principles you'll ever apply. Let's make this practical. Imagine someone earning $5,200 a month. Under a reactive system, that money lands in their account, and then they begin figuring things out as the month unfolds. Under a pre-decided system, something very different happens. The moment that $5,200 arrives, it gets divided. Not randomly, intentionally. Maybe 55% goes to essentials, rent, bills, groceries. 10% goes immediately into a buffer account. 10% toward debt reduction. 10% into long-term investing. The remaining 15% becomes spending money. No guilt, no second guessing. Just a clear boundary. The key here is not the percentages, it's the sequence. Allocation happens first. Spending happens after. And that reverses everything. Because now, you're not hoping something is left. You're deciding what is protected. That distinction matters more than most people realize. When you rely on leftovers, your future depends on your mood. When you pre-decide, your future depends on your system. And systems don't get tired. They don't negotiate. They don't justify small exceptions that slowly become habits. They just execute. Now here's where I want to challenge you a little. If you're currently saving whatever is left at the end of the month, you're not saving. You're wishing. Because the structure you're using almost guarantees inconsistency. Some months will work, many won't. And over time, that inconsistency becomes your identity. I'm just not good at saving. No, you've just been using a system that requires you to win every emotional decision, and that's not realistic. So we remove the decision. That's the entire point. You make the important choices once, when you're calm, clear, and intentional. And then you let the system carry them out when real life happens. This is what people mean when they talk about paying yourself first. But I want you to understand why it works. It's not a motivational idea, it's mechanical. You are taking your future out of the category of optional and placing it into the category of non-negotiable. Before anything else touches your money, that changes your entire trajectory. Now let's address something people don't say out loud. At first, this can feel restrictive. You might look at your allocated spending portion and think, that's not enough. And maybe it isn't. Yet. But here's the reframe. Right now, your spending already has a limit. You just don't see it clearly. It's defined by your stress, by your end-of-month anxiety, by the moments where you realize you went too far. Pre-decided money doesn't create a limit. It reveals it. And when you can see it clearly, you can finally work with it, adjust it, improve it, expand it over time. But from a place of awareness, not reaction. And here's something else that happens. Once your essentials, savings, and future are already handled, your spending becomes lighter, cleaner. You stop questioning every purchase because you know the important things are already taken care of. That's the paradox. Structure creates freedom, not immediately, but progressively. Because every month your system runs, you build something, a buffer, a habit, a sense of control, and eventually, a different relationship with money. One where it stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something you direct. So the next time money enters your life, don't wait to see what's left. Decide what matters first, and let everything else adjust around that. Because your future should never be what's left over. Chapter 5. The Margin Trap. There's a moment that feels like progress. You earn more, and almost instantly, your life expands to meet it. Not dramatically, not recklessly, just naturally. You upgrade your apartment because you can. You spend a little more freely because you worked for it. You stop checking prices as carefully because it no longer feels necessary. And for a while, it feels good, like things are finally moving in the right direction. But then something subtle happens. Your expenses don't just increase, they solidify. What used to be optional becomes expected. What used to feel like a treat becomes normal. What used to be flexible becomes fixed. And without realizing it, you've entered what I call the margin trap. Margin is the space between what you earn and what you must spend. It's your breathing room, your flexibility, your ability to absorb stress without collapsing. And the trap works like this. As income rises, instead of increasing your margin, you increase your commitments, which means your margin stays the same. Or worse, it shrinks. Let me show you this clearly. Imagine someone earning $4,000 a month. Their total fixed and essential costs are $3,200. That leaves $800 of margin. Now they get a raise to $6,000. This should change everything. But instead, they upgrade their lifestyle. Rent increases, car payment appears. Monthly habits become more expensive. Now their fixed and essential costs rise to $5,400. Their margin? Still $600. In some cases, even less than before. More income, less freedom. That's the margin trap. And it's dangerous because it feels like success while it's happening. You don't feel like you're making a mistake. You feel like you're finally catching up. But structurally, you've done something very specific. You've converted opportunity into obligation. You've taken something flexible, your income, and turned it into something rigid, your lifestyle. And once that happens, you don't just want your income, you need it. That's when pressure enters, because now your entire life depends on maintaining a certain level of performance. If your income drops, even slightly, everything becomes unstable. That's not freedom. That's dependency at a higher level. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't feel stressed because they earn too little. They feel stressed because they've committed too much. That's a hard thing to admit, because it means the solution isn't just external. It's structural. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And more importantly, you can start changing it. The question is no longer, what can I afford now? The question becomes, what does this decision do to my margin? Every time you increase a fixed monthly cost, you reduce your flexibility. Every time you add a new obligation, you raise the baseline your life depends on. And once that baseline rises, it's very difficult to bring it back down. That's why the sequence matters so much. When your income increases, your first move should not be upgrading your lifestyle. Your first move should be strengthening your structure, increasing your savings rate, reducing debt faster, expanding your buffer, building systems that make your life more stable. Only after that should your lifestyle begin to expand, not as a reaction, as a result. Because when you build structure first, your upgrades don't trap you. They sit on top of something stable. They become choices, not dependencies. And that's a completely different experience. Now, let's be clear about something. This is not about denying yourself. You don't need to live small forever. You don't need to reject comfort or enjoyment. But you do need to understand the cost of timing. When you upgrade too early, you trade long-term freedom for short-term satisfaction. When you upgrade after building structure, you get both. That's the difference. And most people never experience it because they rush the sequence. So here's the question I want you to sit with. Right now, how much of your current lifestyle is a choice? And how much of it is a commitment you can't easily step away from? Because the more your life depends on maintaining a certain income, the less free you actually are. And freedom, real freedom, starts with margin. Not more money, more space between what you earn and what you need. Protect that space, because once you lose it, everything starts to feel heavier. Chapter 6. You do not need more money to need better rules. There's a quiet sentence that keeps people stuck for years. I'll get serious about my finances once I earn more. It sounds responsible. It sounds like you're waiting for the right moment, the right conditions, the right level of comfort before you start. But if you look closely, that moment never actually arrives. Because when more money comes, life expands to meet it. And suddenly, you're in the same position, just at a higher level. This is what I call the delay loop, and it has no natural exit. Because it depends on a future version of you behaving differently, without ever practicing that behavior now. So nothing changes. Now here's the reframe that matters. You don't need more money to build a system. You need better rules. I call this the one rule reset. And it's exactly what it sounds like. You don't overhaul everything. You don't try to fix your entire financial life in 1 week. You choose one rule, one structural decision, and you apply it consistently. Let me make this real. Imagine someone earning $3,200 a month. They feel like it's not enough. They're tight on expenses. They tell themselves saving isn't realistic right now. So they wait. Now imagine a different version of that same person, same income, same situation. But they introduce one rule. Every time money comes in, 8% moves to a separate account immediately. That's it. Not 30%, not something extreme, just 8%. On $3,200, that's about $256 a month. It doesn't feel life-changing. But here's what actually happens over 12 months. That person builds over $3,000. More importantly, they build proof. Proof that they are someone who can follow a structure. Proof that money doesn't have to pass through their life untouched. Proof that change is not dependent on income. It's dependent on behavior. And that proof matters more than the number, because once you have it, everything else becomes easier. Now let's address the resistance that comes up here. You might be thinking, but my situation is tight. I can't afford to do that. And that may be partially true. But here's the uncomfortable part. You're already following rules. You just didn't choose them. Right now, your money follows patterns. Spend here, delay there, justify this, ignore that. Those are rules. They just formed unconsciously. And the results you're getting right now are the result of those rules. So the question isn't whether you have a system. You do. The question is whether you designed it or drifted into it. The one rule reset is how you take that control back. You start small, but you start deliberately. And over time, something important happens. Rules stack. One rule becomes two. Two becomes a structure. A structure becomes a system. And a system becomes identity. That's the progression. Not big change, consistent change. Now here's where I want to be direct with you. If you keep waiting until your financial life feels comfortable before you build structure, you will wait forever. Because comfort is not what creates discipline. Discipline, applied through simple rules, creates comfort. That's the order. And once you reverse it, everything starts to shift. You stop negotiating with yourself every month. You stop relying on motivation. You stop hoping you'll do better next time. Because the decision has already been made. And that's the real power here. Not the percentage, not the amount. The removal of friction. You are no longer deciding in the moment. You decided once, and now your system executes. That's what makes this sustainable. Because life will interrupt you. You will have stressful weeks. You will have moments where you don't feel like doing the right thing. And if your system depends on how you feel, it will break. But if it depends on rules, it holds. So here's where I want you to land. Not with a full plan, not with 10 changes, just one. What is one rule you can implement this week, with the money you already have, that would slightly improve your structure? Not perfectly, just clearly. Because that's how this starts. Not with more money, with better decisions. And better decisions don't come from pressure. They come from design. Chapter 7. Calm your nervous system, or it will run your money. Most people think their financial problems are logical. Numbers, income, expenses, math. And on the surface, that's true. But if you've ever made a financial decision you knew wasn't smart, and did it anyway, then you already know something deeper is happening. Because you didn't lack information. You lacked calm. And that changes everything. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Your financial life is not just a money system. It's a nervous system. And if that system is constantly activated, stressed, uncertain, overwhelmed, you will make short-term decisions, even when you know better. This is what I call the predictability loop. And it works like this. When your finances feel unpredictable, when you don't know what's coming, when bills feel like surprises, when your balance fluctuates in ways you don't fully understand, your brain interprets that as risk, not theoretical risk, real, immediate threat. And when that happens, your body shifts into survival mode. In survival mode, your brain prioritizes relief, not strategy, relief, which means you avoid looking at your accounts because it feels uncomfortable. You make impulse purchases because they temporarily reduce stress. You delay decisions because thinking long-term feels overwhelming. None of these behaviors are irrational. They're biological, but they are expensive. Because every decision made in that state is designed to feel better now, not to work better later. Let me make this real. Imagine someone whose bills hit at random times throughout the month. Rent on the 3rd, credit card on the 11th, subscriptions scattered across different dates. unexpected expenses showing up with no buffer to absorb them. Every few days, something hits their account, and every time it does, there's a small spike of tension. Is there enough? Did I forget something? Will this clear? That constant low-level uncertainty keeps their nervous system active. Now compare that to someone with structure. Their bills are organized. Their essential expenses are covered early. They have a buffer account that absorbs irregular costs. They know, before the month even begins, that they're okay. Same income, different nervous system. And that difference changes behavior. Because when you feel safe, you think differently. You plan. You choose. You act with intention. But when you feel unstable, you react. Even if you don't want to. Now here's the part I want you to hear clearly. If your financial life feels chaotic, you cannot rely on willpower to fix it. You need predictability. Because predictability creates calm, and calm allows better decisions. So instead of asking, how do I become more disciplined? Ask a better question. How do I make my financial life more predictable? That's where real change starts. And you don't need to fix everything at once. You start with one area, the most stressful one, the one that makes you hesitate every time you think about it. Maybe it's a bill that always surprises you. Maybe it's your credit card balance. Maybe it's your inconsistent spending. Pick one and design a structural response. Not a promise, not a goal, a system. For example, if a $400 expense keeps catching you off guard, you don't tell yourself to be better next time. You create a buffer. You set aside $100 a month into a separate account. So when it happens again, and it will, it's not a crisis. It's covered. That one change does something powerful. It closes a loop. It takes something unpredictable and makes it expected. And every time you do that, your nervous system relaxes a little more. You move from reacting to designing. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. If your financial life currently feels stressful, it's not because you're incapable. It's because your system is asking your brain to operate under constant uncertainty, and no one performs well in that state. So we don't push harder. We build smarter. We remove unpredictability where we can. We create structure where there was none. We give your mind something it hasn't had in a long time. Stability. Because once your nervous system starts to trust your system, everything else becomes easier. Decisions feel clearer. Discipline feels less necessary. Progress feels possible. Not because you changed who you are, because you changed what you're operating inside. So here's the question I want to leave you with. What is the most unpredictable part of your financial life right now? And what would it look like to make it predictable? Start there. Because calm is not something you wait for. It's something you build. Chapter 8. Build buffers before you build dreams. Most financial stress doesn't come from disasters. It doesn't come from losing everything overnight. It comes from smaller moments, the kind that shouldn't matter as much as they do. A car repair, a medical bill, a broken appliance, a yearly payment you forgot was coming. Individually, none of these are life-ending. But when they arrive without preparation, they feel like emergencies. And when life starts to feel like a series of emergencies, you stop thinking long-term. You stop building. You start reacting. That's why this chapter matters. Because before you think about investing, growing, or scaling anything, you need to stabilize your ground. I call this the shock absorber account. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It doesn't exist to grow your wealth. It exists to protect your life from disruption. Let's make this real. Imagine someone who finally decides to get serious about money. They start investing $300 a month. They feel proud of it. They feel like they're finally building something. Then 2 months later, their car breaks down. The repair costs $800. They don't have a buffer, so what happens? They pull the money from their investment. Or worse, they put it on a credit card. And just like that, they're back where they started. Not because they made a bad decision, because they skipped a step. They tried to build upward without stabilizing what's underneath. That's the mistake. Dreams are fragile without buffers. Now let's reframe something important. Most people think these expenses are unexpected. They're not. They're irregular, but they are predictable. Cars need maintenance. Bodies need care. Homes require repair. Life includes events that don't happen every month, but still happen. And if something happens every year, it's not a surprise. It's a category. The problem is not the expense. It's the absence of a place for it to go. That's what the shock absorber account solves. It gives irregular expenses a home. So when they show up, they don't disrupt everything else. Here's how this works in practice. Let's say you look at your past year and estimate $1,200 for car maintenance, $600 for medical/dental, $800 for gifts, events, and travel, $400 for random repairs. That's $3,000 per year. Instead of reacting to each expense, you divide that by 12. That's $250 a month. Now, every month, $250 goes into your buffer account. Quietly, automatically. And when something happens, you don't panic. You don't rearrange your entire financial life. You don't undo progress. You simply use the buffer. That's the difference. The same event feels completely different depending on whether you prepared for it. Now here's where I want to challenge your thinking. A lot of people resist this. They say, I'd rather invest that money. I don't want it just sitting there. I want my money working for me. And I understand that. But here's the reality. If your system cannot absorb a $500 to $1,000 disruption, your money is not working for you. You are working for your instability. Because every unexpected expense will keep resetting you, over and over again. The buffer is not wasted potential. It's protected progress. It ensures that what you build stays built. And that's more valuable than most people realize. Now here's something subtle but powerful. When you have a buffer, your entire relationship with money changes. You stop bracing for impact. You stop feeling like every expense is a threat. You stop making decisions from urgency. Instead, you move differently, more calmly, more deliberately, more confidently. Because you know something most people don't feel. I can handle this. And that feeling is the beginning of control. So before you focus on growing your money, ask yourself this. Can your current system handle real life? Not ideal conditions. Real life. Because if the answer is no, then your next move is not to build higher. It's to build stronger. Start with a buffer. Even if it's small, $50 a month, $100 a month. The amount doesn't matter at first. The system does. Because every dollar in that account is doing something important. It's absorbing chaos, so your life doesn't have to. And once that's in place, then you can build. With confidence. With stability. Without constantly starting over. That's how progress becomes real. Not when you earn more. When what you build finally stops breaking. Chapter 9. Debt is future income already spoken for. Debt feels personal. It feels like a mistake, a bad decision, a lack of discipline, something you should have handled better. And because it feels that way, most people approach it emotionally, with guilt, with avoidance, with pressure to fix it quickly. But that approach rarely works, because debt is not primarily an emotional problem. It's a structural one. And until you see it that way, you'll keep fighting the wrong battle. I call this the future paycheck drain. Because that's exactly what debt is. It's not just money you owe. It's income you haven't earned yet, that already has a destination. Every month you make a payment. You are sending money from your future self to cover decisions from your past. And the more debt you carry, the less freedom your future income actually has. Let's make this real. Imagine two people. Both earn $5,000 a month. On paper, they look identical, but person A has no debt. Person B has $900 in monthly debt payments. Car loan, credit cards, maybe some financing. Now ask yourself, do they really earn the same? Not functionally. Person A has $5,000 of usable income. Person B has $4,100 before they even make a single decision. That's the difference debt creates. It reduces your future before it arrives. And this is where I need to say something directly. Debt doesn't just cost you money. It costs you options. Because when a large portion of your income is already committed, you have less flexibility, less ability to take risks, less ability to pause, less ability to adapt when life changes. And that's what makes it heavy. Not just the balance, the pressure. Now here's where most people go wrong. They try to attack debt aggressively, without fixing the system that created it. They focus on paying it off faster, but they don't change the structure of their spending. So what happens? They make progress for a few months. Then something breaks. An unexpected expense, a stressful period, a moment of fatigue, and suddenly, they're back in debt again. Not because they failed, because the system never changed. So before you focus on speed, you need to focus on stability. That's the first principle. Stop the bleeding. If money is consistently leaving your life faster than it's coming in, debt will continue to grow, no matter how motivated you are. So you start by balancing the flow, making sure your current income can actually support your current life, without relying on credit to fill the gap. Only then does repayment become effective. Now comes the second part. Clarity. You need to see your debt fully, not vaguely, not emotionally, structurally. List everything: balance, interest rate, minimum payment. No hiding, no rounding down, just the truth. Because once you can see it clearly, you can finally make a plan. And this is where you choose your approach. There are two common methods. The avalanche method. You focus on the highest interest debt first. Mathematically efficient. You pay less over time. The snowball method. You focus on the smallest balance first. Psychologically powerful. You get quick wins. Momentum builds. Now here's the part people argue about. Which one is better? The honest answer. The one you will actually follow. Because a perfect plan that you abandon is worse than a slightly imperfect one you stick to. This is not a math problem. It's a behavior problem. So choose the approach that keeps you moving. Then turn it into a rule, a fixed amount, Non-negotiable, every month. Not based on what's left, based on what matters. Because every payment you make is doing something important. It's not just reducing a number, it's reclaiming your future. Every debt you eliminate returns a piece of your income back to you. Permanently. That $300 payment? Gone. Now it becomes savings, or investing, or margin. That's how this compounds. Not just financially, structurally. Now here's the reframe I want you to carry forward. Debt is not something you should feel ashamed of, but it is something you should take seriously. Because every month you delay addressing it, you are giving away a portion of your future, and your future deserves better than that. So don't approach this with panic, or guilt, or urgency that leads to burnout. Approach it with clarity, with structure, with consistency. Because you don't need to fix everything at once. You just need to stop making it worse and start making it smaller. 1 month at a time, 1 payment at a time, until one day, you notice something different. More of your income stays with you. And that's when things begin to open up. Not because you earned more, because you finally kept more. So ask yourself this. Right now, how much of your future income is already spoken for? And what would it look like to slowly take it back? Chapter 10. Saving defends you, cash flow frees you. At some point, you start doing the right thing. You begin saving, maybe slowly at first, maybe inconsistently, but eventually you build something, a few hundred, then a few thousand, and that matters. Because saving is the first real sign that your financial life is changing. You are no longer just surviving. You are creating protection. But here's where most people stop, and where they quietly limit themselves without realizing it. Because saving is not the end of the story. It's the beginning. I want you to think about it like this. Saving is a wall. It protects you. It stands between you and chaos when something goes wrong. And if you've ever had an emergency fund when life hit unexpectedly, you know how powerful that is. The difference between panic and control. But a wall, by itself, does not move you forward. It only prevents you from going backward. And if all you ever build is protection, your entire financial life still depends on one thing: your ability to keep working. That's the limitation, and it's an important one to face honestly. Because your time is limited. Your energy is limited. Your ability to show up consistently every single day has a ceiling. So if your financial life depends entirely on that, it will always carry a quiet risk. Even if everything looks stable on the surface, this is where the shift happens. From saving to cash flow. I call this wall versus engine, and once you see the difference, you can't unsee it. The wall protects you. The engine moves you. Let me make this real. Imagine 2 people. Person A has done everything right, so they have $15,000 saved, 6 months of expenses. They feel secure, and they are, partially. But if their income stops tomorrow, the clock starts ticking. Every month, that $15,000 becomes $13,000, then $11,000, then less. They are protected, but they are still dependent. Now imagine person B. They have less savings, maybe only $6,000, but they've started building something else. A small side income that brings in $400 a month. A simple investment that generates a modest return. A system that continues to produce something, even when they're not actively working. Now, if their income stops, the situation is different. The clock still exists, but it moves slower because money is still flowing toward them, even if it's small. That's the engine. And that changes everything. Because the goal of financial stability is not just to protect yourself from emergencies, it's to reduce how much your life depends on constant effort. Not all at once. Gradually, deliberately, one stream at a time. Now here's where I want to be clear. This is not about quitting your job. It's not about chasing passive income fantasies. It's about building resilience into your system. Because life will interrupt you. You will get tired. You may want to change direction. And when that moment comes, your system should support you, not collapse the moment you stop pushing. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. If your current financial life requires you to perform at full capacity every month, then it is fragile, even if it looks successful, because it has no redundancy, no backup, no engine. And that's what we're starting to build. Not overnight, not dramatically, but consistently. Maybe it starts with something small, an extra $100 a month from a skill you already have, a simple investment account that grows slowly over time, a system that captures value without requiring constant attention. At first, it will feel insignificant, almost pointless, and that's where most people quit. Because they're still thinking in short-term terms. But if you stay with it, if you keep building, even at a small scale, something begins to shift. That $100 becomes $300, then $500, then more. And more importantly, your mindset changes. You stop seeing money as something you have to chase. You start seeing it as something you can design. That's the real shift. From effort to structure, from dependence to resilience, and eventually to freedom. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, where you know that even if something changes, you're still moving forward, because your system is still working. So here's the question I want to leave you with. Right now, if you stopped working for a month, would money still move toward you? Even a little? Because that answer tells you exactly where you are, and more importantly, what you need to build next. Chapter 11. Leverage is not flashy, it is repeatable. The word leverage makes people uneasy. It sounds risky, complicated, like something reserved for investors, entrepreneurs, or people who already have money. But real leverage, the kind that actually changes your life, is much simpler than that, and much quieter. It doesn't look impressive at first. In fact, it often looks boring. I call this quiet leverage, because the most powerful forms of leverage don't announce themselves. They repeat. Let me explain. Most people try to improve their financial life in a linear way. They work more hours. They take on more clients. They push harder. And this works for a while. Income increases, but so does effort. And eventually, they hit a ceiling. Because there are only so many hours in a day, only so much energy you can give, only so long you can sustain that pace. That's the limitation of linear growth. More input equals more output, until it doesn't. Leverage changes that relationship. It allows one action to produce results more than once, not instantly, but repeatedly. Let me give you 3 forms of leverage you can actually build. The first is time leverage. This is when something you did in the past continues to create value in the present. For example, you set up an automatic investment account 2 years ago. Every month, money flows into it. You're not making a new decision each time. The system is running. Or you develop a skill that increases your earning ability. Instead of earning $20 an hour, you now earn $40. Same time, double output. That's leverage. Past effort, continuing to pay you. The second is system leverage. This is when processes replace decisions. Automatic bill payments, automatic savings transfers, predefined spending rules. Every time a system handles something that used to require your attention, you reclaim energy, and that energy can be used for something else. Building, thinking, growing. Most people underestimate this. They think leverage is about making more money, but reducing decision fatigue is just as powerful because it allows consistency, and consistency is what compounds. The third is decision leverage. This is the simplest and most overlooked. One good decision, repeated over time, creates disproportionate results. For example, deciding today to invest 10% of your income every month. That decision takes 5 minutes, but the results compound for years. You don't need to keep deciding. You just need to not undo it. That's leverage. Small input, large outcome. Now here's where I want to challenge your perspective. Most people ignore these forms of leverage because they don't feel exciting. They don't produce immediate results. They don't create dramatic change in 30 days. So they chase something else, something faster, something more visible. And in doing that, they stay stuck in linear effort. Always working more, always needing to push, always tied directly to their output. But here's the truth: the life you want cannot be built through effort alone. At some point, effort must be replaced by structure, or you will burn out. Now, this doesn't mean you stop working hard. It means you start working in a way that compounds. You build things once that continue working. You make decisions once that continue producing results. You create systems once that reduce the need for future effort. And over time, something subtle happens. Your output becomes less dependent on your input. Not completely, but noticeably. And that's where real progress begins. Because now, when you rest, things don't stop. When you get tired, your system still runs. When life interrupts you, you don't lose everything. That's leverage. Not flashy, not instant, but reliable. Now here's the uncomfortable part. If everything in your financial life currently depends on you showing up every day, then you have no leverage. And that's a fragile position to be in, even if your income is high. So you don't need to build something massive. You just need to start small. One system, one decision, one stream that continues without constant effort, and then another, and then another. Because leverage is not something you wait for. It's something you build, quietly, consistently, until one day, you realize something has changed. You're no longer starting from zero every month. You're building on top of what already exists, and that's when momentum becomes real. So here's the question I want you to consider. What is one thing you can build once that would keep working for you after you're done? Start there, because that's where effort turns into growth. Chapter 12. Define enough or you will chase forever. There's a question almost no one asks themselves seriously, not once, not clearly, and yet it quietly controls everything. How much is enough? Not enough to survive, not enough to feel temporarily comfortable. Enough. The point where you could look at your life and say, this works. This supports the life I actually want. This is sufficient. Most people never answer this. Not because they tried and failed, because they never stop long enough to ask. Instead, they inherit a default. More, more income, more upgrades, more options, more progress. And it sounds harmless, ambitious even. But here's what happens when more is undefined. It never ends. You reach one level and immediately adjust your expectations. You earn $4,000 and think $6,000 will fix everything. You reach $6,000 and start aiming for $10,000. You hit $10,000 and suddenly your lifestyle has expanded to match it. And without realizing it, you are running on a treadmill, moving faster, but not arriving. This is where I want to say something that might feel uncomfortable. If you don't define enough, you will always feel behind, no matter how much you earn. Because your target keeps moving, and when your target moves, your satisfaction disappears. That's why this matters. I call this the enough line, and it's one of the most important lines you will ever draw. Because once you define it, everything becomes clearer. Decisions become simpler. Noise disappears, and progress becomes measurable. Let's make this practical. Imagine someone who sits down and defines their version of enough. They calculate honestly $1,500 for housing, $800 for essentials, $500 for lifestyle, $400 for savings and investing, $300 for flexibility. Total, $3,500 a month. That's their enough line. Now, if they earn $5,000, they're not behind. They're above. They have room, margin, options. But here's the key. They know it. They don't feel like they need to constantly upgrade. They don't feel like they're chasing something undefined. They can make decisions from clarity, not comparison. Now compare that to someone earning $7,000, who has never defined enough. They upgrade everything. Their lifestyle rises to $6,800, and suddenly, they feel tight. Again. More money. Same feeling. Because nothing anchored it. Now, I want to be very clear. Defining enough is not about limiting your life. It's about understanding it. It's about knowing what actually supports you versus what you've been told should matter. Because a lot of spending is not about need. It's about identity, status, comfort, proof, comparison. And none of those have a finish line. That's why they're so expensive. Not just financially, mentally. You keep reaching without ever feeling like you've arrived. Now here's the reframe. Ambition is not the problem. Wanting more is not the problem. But chasing more without defining enough is. Because it turns growth into pressure instead of choice. When you know your enough line, something powerful happens. You gain control over expansion. You can choose to grow your income without immediately expanding your lifestyle. You can decide where increases go. Toward freedom, toward investment, toward building something meaningful, instead of automatically feeding the treadmill. And that's where real progress begins. Not when you earn more, when you stop needing more to feel okay. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. If you're constantly feeling like it's not enough, there's a high chance the number isn't the issue. The definition is, because without a clear enough line, there is no finish line, only movement. So here's what I want you to do. Not later. Now. Ask yourself, what does enough actually look like for me? Not for your peers, not for social media, not for what sounds impressive, for your real life, your real needs, your real values. And be honest, because once you define it, you gain something most people never experience, a sense of arrival, not permanent, not static, but real. And from that place, you can build. Not because you're trying to escape, because you're choosing to expand. And that's a completely different life. Chapter 13. Your spending is trying to tell you who you are. Most people believe their spending is logical. They think they buy things because they need them, or because it makes sense, or because it was worth it. And sometimes that's true. But if you look closely, a lot of your spending is not about what you need. It's about what you feel. And even deeper than that, it's about who you believe you are, or who you're trying to become. I call this identity spending. And once you see it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. Let's start with something simple. Imagine someone has a stressful week. Long hours, pressure, fatigue. At the end of it, they order food more often. They buy something small online, maybe something bigger. And in the moment, it feels justified. I deserve this. And they're not wrong. But the purchase isn't really about the item. It's about relief, temporary emotional relief. Now consider something else. Someone buys a more expensive car than they technically need, or clothes that signal a certain lifestyle, or chooses restaurants that feel impressive rather than enjoyable. Again, not irrational, but not purely practical either. This is about identity, about signaling something to others, but more importantly, to yourself. I've made it. I belong here. I'm this kind of person now. And then there's a third version. The person who buys tools for a life they haven't built yet. Courses they don't complete. Equipment they don't use. Items that represent a version of themselves they haven't fully become. This one is subtle, because it feels productive. But it's often a substitute for action. Now here's the part most people avoid. If you don't understand the emotional layer of your spending, you cannot control it. Because you're not actually making financial decisions. You're managing feelings, and money becomes the tool. That's why logic alone doesn't fix spending habits. Because logic doesn't override identity. Now I want to be clear. This is not about eliminating emotional spending. That's not realistic. And it's not necessary. The goal is not to become robotic. The goal is to become aware, because awareness changes everything. When you can see the real reason behind a purchase, you gain choice. Let me give you a simple tool. Before any non-essential purchase above a certain amount, say $50 or $100, ask yourself 2 questions. First, what practical purpose does this serve? Second, what emotional need is this also addressing? And be honest. Because that second answer is where the truth usually sits. Maybe it's stress. Maybe it's boredom. Maybe it's validation. Maybe it's comfort. And here's what happens when you do this consistently. You don't necessarily stop spending, but you start spending differently. You stop buying things that don't actually solve the feeling they promise to fix. And you start making cleaner decisions, more intentional ones. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of what you spend money on doesn't actually give you what you think it will. It gives you a moment, a short lift, and then it fades. But the cost remains. And when that pattern repeats, it becomes expensive. Not just financially, psychologically, because you keep chasing something that never fully arrives. That's why this matters. Because once you bring your spending into awareness, you break that loop. You stop reacting automatically. You start choosing. And over time, something interesting happens. Your total spending often decreases, not because you're forcing yourself to cut back, because you're no longer spending on things that don't work. You become more accurate, more aligned, more in control, and that changes your entire relationship with money. Now here's the question I want to leave you with. The next time you feel the urge to buy something, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what is this really about? Not the surface answer, the real one. Because the more honest you are there, the less your money will be used to solve problems it was never meant to solve. And that's where clarity begins. Chapter 14. Consistency is more powerful than financial excitement. There's a pattern that looks productive, but quietly destroys progress. You start strong. You set up a system. You track your spending. You feel clear, focused, in control. For a few weeks, maybe even a few months, everything works. Then something shifts. You get bored, or distracted, or you see a new idea, a better app, a different strategy, a more optimized way to manage your money, and you switch. Again. At first, it feels like improvement, like you're evolving. But if you look closely, you're not building, you're restarting, over and over again. I call this structural stillness, and most people never reach it, because it doesn't feel exciting, it feels repetitive. But repetition is where compounding lives. Let me show you what I mean. Imagine two people. Person A is always learning. They try a new budgeting method every few months. They switch investment strategies based on what they see online. They reorganize their system whenever something better appears. They're active, engaged, constantly improving on the surface. Now, person B. They choose a simple system, basic allocation, automatic transfers, monthly review, nothing fancy, and they stick with it. For 3 years, no major changes, no constant optimization, just consistency. At the end of those 3 years, person B is ahead almost every time, not because their system was perfect, because it had time to work. That's the difference. Progress in finance does not come from novelty. It comes from duration. And duration requires stillness. Not physical stillness. Structural stillness. Where your system stays the same long enough for results to compound. Now here's the uncomfortable part. Most people avoid this because it feels slow. There's no immediate reward. No visible transformation in the first few months. Just small movements, incremental changes, and in a world that rewards speed, that feels like nothing. So they leave. They chase something faster, something more exciting, and in doing that, they reset the clock. Every time. That's the real cost of financial distraction. Not the money, the lost time. Because compounding needs time more than it needs perfection. And every time you switch direction, you lose it. Now let's be clear. This doesn't mean you never adjust your system. Life changes. Income changes. Your system should evolve with you. But evolution is not constant switching. It's intentional adjustment. There's a difference. One is reactive. The other is designed. And most people confuse the two. Now here's where I want to challenge you. If you've been jumping between strategies, trying to find the best system, you may not need a better system. You may need to stay with one long enough to see what it actually does. Because a simple system, maintained consistently, will outperform a perfect system, abandoned repeatedly. Every time. That's not theory. That's behavior. And behavior is what determines outcomes. So instead of asking, what's the best way to manage my money? Ask a different question. What system can I realistically follow for the next 3 years? Not 3 weeks. not until you get bored. 3 years, because that's the timeline where real change happens. And if that feels uncomfortable, that's a good sign. It means you're stepping out of short-term thinking and into something real. Now here's the shift that happens when you embrace this. You stop chasing improvement and start building momentum. You stop looking for better and start becoming consistent. And over time, consistency becomes identity. You become someone who follows through, someone who maintains structure, someone who builds instead of restarting. And that changes everything. So here's the question I want you to sit with. Are you building a system, or are you constantly replacing one? Because only one of those leads somewhere. Chapter 15. From money stress to money identity. At some point, if you've followed everything we've discussed, something subtle begins to shift, not just in your bank account, in you. Because up until now, we've been talking about systems, structures, rules, decisions. But beneath all of that, there's something deeper controlling your financial life, your identity. Not who you want to be, not who you say you are, who you actually believe you are when no one is watching. I call this evidence-based identity, because your identity is not built from intentions. It's built from proof, from repeated behavior, from patterns you've lived long enough to believe are true. Let me explain. If you've spent years telling yourself, "I'm bad with money," that belief didn't come from nowhere. It came from experiences, missed payments, impulsive decisions, inconsistent habits. Over time, those moments stack, and they form a story, a quiet one, but a powerful one. And once that story exists, your behavior starts to match it. Not intentionally, automatically. You hesitate to look at your accounts. You avoid making decisions. You break systems you try to build, not because you don't care, because something deeper says, this isn't who you are. And that's where most people get stuck. They try to change their finances without changing their identity. So every improvement feels temporary, fragile, easy to lose. Now here's the reframe. You don't change your identity first, and then your behavior. You change your behavior and let your identity catch up. That's the only way it works, and it happens through evidence, small, consistent evidence. Let's make this real. Imagine someone who has always believed they're bad with money. They start simple. They track their spending for 1 month. Nothing dramatic, just awareness. At the end of that month, they have proof. I can do this. Then they add one rule, an automatic transfer. It runs. Another piece of proof. I follow through. Then they review their finances at the end of the month. They don't avoid it. They face it. More proof. I'm someone who pays attention. Now, none of these actions are life-changing on their own, but together they begin to tell a different story, and that story starts to replace the old one. Not overnight, but steadily. This is how identity shifts, not through motivation, through repetition. Now here's where I want to be direct. If you keep breaking the systems you set up, it's not because you lack discipline, it's because your current identity does not support them. Yet, and that's okay, because identity is not fixed, it's built. But you have to build it deliberately, through action, through consistency, through keeping small commitments, even when they don't feel important. Because every time you follow through, you are casting a vote for a different version of yourself, and over time, those votes add up, until one day, you don't have to force it anymore. You don't have to remind yourself to check your accounts. You don't have to convince yourself to follow your system. It's just what you do, because it's who you are. Now here's the part most people don't expect. When your identity changes, your relationship with money changes automatically. You stop seeing money as something stressful, or confusing, or something to avoid. You see it as something you manage, something you understand, something you direct. And that's when everything becomes easier. Not because your situation is perfect, because you are different inside it. Now here's the final truth I want to leave you with. Your financial life is not built from big decisions. It's built from small ones, repeated consistently over time. And those small decisions are shaping who you become. So the question is not, am I good with money? The question is, what kind of person am I becoming through the way I handle it? Because whether you realize it or not, you are building an identity every single month. The only question is, are you building it on purpose? Chapter 16. Time horizon, the invisible force that shapes your results. There's something quietly controlling your financial life right now, and most people never notice it. Not your income, not your spending, not even your habits. Your time horizon. How far ahead you are thinking when you make decisions. I call this the time horizon gap. And once you see it, you'll understand why progress feels so slow for some people and almost inevitable for others. Let's start with something simple. Most people operate on a 30-day financial cycle. Paycheck to paycheck, bill to bill. Month to month, their entire financial life resets every 30 days. And when your time horizon is 30 days, your decisions are short-term. You focus on, what do I need to cover this month? How do I make it to the next paycheck? How do I feel right now? That's survival thinking. And there's nothing wrong with it, if that's where you are. But if you stay there, you will never build anything beyond it. Because short horizons produce short strategies. You patch problems. You don't solve them. Now let's shift the frame. Imagine the same person, same income, same situation. But instead of thinking in 30 days, they start thinking in 3 years. Nothing else changes, just the time frame. Suddenly, everything looks different. That $200 they considered too small to matter? Over 36 months, it becomes $7,200. That debt they felt overwhelmed by? Broken into 36 consistent payments, it becomes manageable. That system they felt unsure about? Given enough time, it becomes predictable. This is the power of extending your horizon. The math didn't change. Your perception did. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't fail financially because they lack intelligence. They fail because they underestimate time. They expect results too quickly. And when those results don't appear, they assume the system isn't working. So they quit, or switch, or stop. Right before compounding begins to matter. This is where the real cost shows up. Not in money, in lost momentum. Let me give you a real scenario. 2 people both decide to invest $300 a month. Person A expects to see results within 6 months. They check constantly. They feel underwhelmed. They stop after 8 months. Total invested, $2,400. Outcome, minimal. Person B commits to 3 years. Same $300 a month. They don't expect dramatic change early. They trust the process. After 36 months, they've invested $10,800. But more importantly, they've built consistency, a habit, a system that runs. That's the difference. Not intelligence, not income. Time horizon. Now here's something deeper. Your time horizon doesn't just affect your money, it affects your emotions. When you think short term, every fluctuation feels like a problem. A bad month feels like failure. An unexpected expense feels like disruption. A slow period feels like you're falling behind because you're zoomed in too closely. But when you extend your horizon, those same events become smaller. A bad month becomes a data point. An expense becomes expected. A slow period becomes part of the process. And that changes how you respond. You stay steady. You don't panic. You don't abandon the system. Now here's where I want to be direct with you. If you keep evaluating your financial life month by month, you will always feel behind. Because meaningful progress does not happen on a monthly timeline. It happens on a yearly one, and more often, on a multi-year one. That's the reality most people avoid. Because it requires patience. And patience feels uncomfortable when you're used to immediate feedback. But here's the reframe. You don't need patience because nothing is happening. You need patience because something is. You just can't see it yet. That's the nature of compounding. Now let's make this practical. Instead of asking, "Am I better this month?" ask, "Is my system working? Are you allocating consistently? Are your rules holding? Is your structure stable?" If the answer is yes, you are progressing, even if the numbers don't feel impressive yet. Because results follow process, not the other way around. And this is where the shift happens. You stop chasing visible change and start protecting invisible progress. Because invisible progress is what becomes visible later. Now here's the final question I want to leave you with. If nothing in your life changed, except your time horizon, how would your decisions look different? What would you stop reacting to? What would you start building? Because the future you want is not created in the next 30 days. It's created by what you repeat over the next 3 years. Extend your horizon, and everything else starts to make sense. Chapter 17. Financial distraction. Why starting over keeps you stuck. There's a behavior that feels like progress, but quietly destroys it. You learn something new about money, a better strategy, a smarter approach, a different system. It makes sense. It feels right. So you change. Again. At first, this feels like growth. You're improving. You're adapting. You're not staying stuck. But if you zoom out, a different pattern appears. You are not building. You are restarting. I call this the reset cycle, and it's one of the most expensive habits in personal finance. Not because it costs money, because it costs time. Let me show you how this plays out. Imagine someone who decides to get serious about their finances. They set up a budgeting system. They track their spending. They start saving consistently. For 2 months, everything works. Then they see something new, a different method, a more optimized approach, a video that promises better results. So they switch. New system, new structure, new excitement. For a while, it works again. Then something else appears, and the cycle repeats. 6 months later, they've tried 3 different systems and built none. That's the reset cycle. And it feels productive because you're always doing something. But nothing is compounding. Because compounding requires continuity, and continuity requires staying with something long enough for it to work. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't have a system problem. They have a consistency problem. They're not failing because their approach is wrong. They're failing because they don't give it time. And this is where financial content makes things worse. Because you are constantly exposed to new ideas, new strategies, new tools, new ways to optimize. And your brain starts to believe, there must be something better. So you keep searching, keep adjusting, keep restarting. But here's what that search actually costs you. Every time you change direction, you reset your progress. Not completely, but enough to matter. Let me give you a simple example. Someone saves $300 a month for 5 months. Then they switch systems. They stop for a bit, reorganize, restart, then save for another 4 months, then switch again. At the end of a year, they might have saved $2,700. But more importantly, they've built no rhythm, no identity, no trust in their own system. Now compare that to someone who saved $300 a month for 12 months straight. Same amount, but completely different outcome. Because one built momentum, the other broke it repeatedly. That's the real cost. Now here's the deeper layer. This isn't just about systems, it's about discomfort. Because consistency feels boring. There's no excitement, no novelty, no immediate reward, just repetition. And most people are not used to that. They're used to stimulation, new ideas, quick wins, visible progress. So when things feel slow, they assume something is wrong. But slow is where real change happens. And this is where I need to challenge you. If you're constantly looking for a better system, you may be avoiding the one you already have. Not because it doesn't work, because it requires patience. And patience feels uncomfortable when results are not immediate. But here's the truth. A simple system, applied consistently, will outperform a complex system, applied inconsistently. Every time. That's not theory. That's behavior. Now, this doesn't mean you should never improve your system. You should. But improvement is not constant change. It's intentional refinement. There's a difference. One is reactive, the other is designed. Reactive change happens when you feel uncomfortable. Designed change happens when something is clearly not working, and most people confuse the two. Now here's the shift I want you to make. Stop asking, what's the best system? Start asking, what system can I follow, even when I don't feel like it? Because that's the one that will last. And the one that lasts is the one that compounds. Now here's the final thought I want to leave you with. If you keep restarting, you will always feel like you're at the beginning. No matter how much you've learned, no matter how many times you've tried. Because progress is not built from starting, it's built from continuing. So ask yourself this: are you improving your system, or are you escaping the discomfort of staying consistent? Because only one of those leads forward, and the other keeps you exactly where you are. Chapter 18. Opportunity Cost. What your money is silently saying no to every time you spend money. You are making two decisions, the one you see and the one you don't. You see what you're buying, but you don't see what you're giving up. I call this invisible trade-offs. And once you understand this, your entire perspective on spending changes. Because money is not just about what you can afford. It's about what you are choosing over everything else that money could have become. Let's make this real. You spend $200 on something that feels reasonable. Not excessive, not reckless, just normal. In isolation, it's nothing. But zoom out. That same $200 invested monthly over time becomes something very different. Over a year, that's $2,400. Over 3 years, $7,200. Over longer periods, with growth, it becomes even more. Now here's the key point. This is not about guilt, it's about awareness. Because the goal is not to stop spending. It's to understand the trade-off. What are you choosing instead? Because every dollar only gets one job, and once it's used, every other possibility disappears. That's the cost most people never see. Now here's where it becomes dangerous. When spending becomes automatic, you stop evaluating those trade-offs. You just act. Convenience wins. Emotion wins. Habit wins. And the invisible cost keeps accumulating, quietly, over time. Let me give you a simple pattern. Someone subscribes to multiple services. $10 here, $15 there, $20 somewhere else. Individually, they feel insignificant. But together, they might total $100 to $200 a month. That's $1,200 to $2,400 a year. And most of it goes unnoticed, because each decision felt small. This is how opportunity cost hides. In small, repeated choices, not big, dramatic ones. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't feel the cost of their spending because the consequence is delayed. You don't feel the absence of savings immediately. You don't feel the missed investment opportunity. You don't feel the reduced flexibility. Not today. But over time, it shows up in slower progress, in tighter margins, in fewer options. And by then, it feels like a general problem, not a series of small decisions. That's why awareness matters. Because once you see the trade-offs, you can choose differently. Not perfectly, but intentionally. Now here's the shift I want you to make. Before spending, pause for a moment and ask, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? Not in a dramatic way, in a real way. Maybe it's future savings. Maybe it's reducing debt faster. Maybe it's building your buffer. There is always a trade, and once you acknowledge it, you take control of the decision. Now here's something important. This is not about eliminating enjoyment. You are allowed to spend. You are allowed to enjoy your money. But conscious spending feels different from automatic spending. It's cleaner, lighter. Because you chose it. You understood the cost and accepted it. That's where freedom exists. Not in restriction, in awareness. Now let's go deeper. Opportunity cost also applies to bigger decisions. Where you live, what you drive, what lifestyle you maintain. These are not just expenses, they are commitments. And every commitment reduces your flexibility. If your rent increases by $500 a month, that's $6,000 a year. That's not just money spent. That's money that cannot be saved, invested, or used elsewhere. And once that commitment is made, it's hard to reverse. That's why bigger decisions matter more. Because their opportunity cost is ongoing, not one time. Now here's the final reframe. Most people think financial success is about earning more, but just as important is what you choose not to spend. Because every dollar you don't use today can work for you tomorrow. And over time, that difference compounds. Not dramatically, quietly, until one day, it becomes visible. So here's the question I want you to sit with. The next time you're about to spend money, pause and ask, what future am I choosing instead of? Because that's what every dollar represents. Not just a purchase, a direction. And over time, those directions become your life. Chapter 19. Your environment is quietly spending your money. There's a force influencing your financial decisions that you rarely question. Not your income, not your discipline, not even your habits. Your environment, the spaces you move through, the people you're around, the content you consume, all of it is shaping your spending. Quietly, consistently, without asking for permission. I call this default influence, because most of your financial behavior is not actively chosen. It's absorbed. Let's start with something simple. Imagine two environments. In one, everyone around you values simplicity. They talk about saving, investing, building long-term stability. Spending is intentional. Upgrades are thoughtful. There's no pressure to prove anything. Now the second environment. People upgrade constantly. New phones, better cars, expensive dinners. There's a subtle expectation to keep up, to not fall behind, to signal that you're doing well. Same person, completely different behavior. That's the power of environment. You don't need to be told what to do. You adapt automatically. Now here's where it becomes dangerous. Because most environments today are designed to increase spending. Social media shows you curated lifestyles. Ads follow you based on your interests. Content normalizes constant upgrading, and slowly, your perception of normal shifts. What used to feel like a luxury now feels standard. What used to feel unnecessary now feels justified, and you don't notice the change because it happens gradually. That's how default influence works. It doesn't force you. It reframes your expectations. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. If you are constantly exposed to higher levels of consumption, your spending will rise. Not because you're weak, because you're human. You calibrate based on what you see, and if what you see is always more, you will feel like you're behind, even if you're doing well. Now let's bring this back to something practical. Think about your daily inputs, the accounts you follow, the conversations you have, the environments you spend time in. What do they normalize? Do they normalize building or spending? Do they make you feel grounded or behind? Because that emotional baseline directly affects your decisions. Now here's where you take control. You don't need to remove yourself from the world, but you do need to curate your environment. Deliberately. Start with awareness. Notice what triggers spending. Is it scrolling late at night? Is it certain types of content? Is it specific people or situations? Not to judge it, just to see it. Because once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. Now take the next step. Reduce exposure to what pulls you away from your goals, not completely, but intentionally, and increase exposure to what reinforces them. People who think long-term, content that focuses on building, environments that value stability over status. Because the goal is not to rely on willpower. The goal is to make better decisions feel natural, and environment does that. Now here's something subtle but powerful. When your environment aligns with your goals, discipline becomes easier. You don't feel like you're resisting constantly. You feel like you're moving with something, not against it. That's the difference. Now let's go deeper. Your physical environment matters too. How your money is organized, where your accounts are, how easy it is to spend versus save. If everything is frictionless for spending and difficult for saving, your behavior will follow that path. So you design your environment. Make saving automatic. Make spending slightly slower. Create small pauses before decisions. Not to restrict yourself, to create awareness. Because awareness changes behavior. Now here's the final truth. You don't make financial decisions in isolation. You make them inside an environment. And if that environment is not designed, it is influencing you by default. So ask yourself this: is your current environment helping you build the life you want, or quietly pulling you away from it? Because you don't rise to your intentions. You fall to your environment. And once you take control of that, everything else becomes easier. Chapter 20. You don't need perfect control. You need recovery speed. There's a hidden standard most people hold themselves to, without realizing it. I need to do this perfectly. No missed budgets, no impulse spending, no bad months, no mistakes. And when that standard breaks, and it always does, they don't just make a mistake. They collapse the system. I messed up this week. I'll restart next month. I overspent. I'll fix it later. I fell off track. I'll begin again when things calm down. And just like that, progress disappears. Not because of the mistake, because of the response. I call this the recovery gap. And it's the final piece most people never fix because they focus on control instead of recovery. Let me be clear. You will make mistakes. You will overspend sometimes. You will have messy months. You will break your own rules. That's not failure. That's reality. The difference between people who build stability and those who stay stuck is not perfection. It's how fast they recover. Let's make this real. Two people both overspend by $400 in a month. Person A reacts emotionally. They feel frustrated, disappointed, slightly ashamed. So they avoid looking at their finances. They delay fixing it. They tell themselves they'll reset next month. 1 month becomes 2, then 3. The system breaks. Now person B, same mistake, same $400, but a different response. They acknowledge it. No drama, no judgment. They adjust the next week. Maybe they reduce spending slightly. Maybe they pull from a buffer. Maybe they rebalance their plan. Within days, they're back on track. Same mistake. Completely different outcome. That's recovery speed. And over time, that difference compounds. Now here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't lose progress because of big failures. They lose it because of slow recovery. Because they let small mistakes turn into long delays. And those delays are what reset everything. Now let's go deeper. Why does this happen? Because mistakes trigger identity. I'm bad with money. I always mess this up. I knew I couldn't stick to this. And once that identity activates, behavior follows. You stop trying. You disengage. You disconnect from the system. Not because you can't fix it, because you feel like it's already broken. That's the real danger. Not the mistake. The story you attach to it. Now here's the shift. You need to replace perfection with recovery. Instead of asking, how do I never mess up? Ask, how quickly can I return to the system after I do? That's the skill that matters. Because if your recovery speed is high, mistakes don't matter as much. They become small interruptions, not full resets. And that changes everything. Now let's make this practical. Build a recovery rule. Something simple, something automatic. For example, if I overspend, I review my finances within 24 hours. If I miss a week, I return the next week. No restarting. If something breaks, I adjust immediately, not next month. These rules remove emotion. They give you a path back, and that path is what keeps your system alive. Now here's something powerful. When you stop expecting perfection, you stop fearing mistakes. And when you stop fearing mistakes, you stay engaged. You don't avoid your finances. You don't disconnect. You stay inside the system. And staying inside the system is what creates progress. Not perfect behavior, consistent participation. Now here's the final truth. Your financial life will never be perfectly controlled, but it can be consistently corrected. And correction, done quickly, repeatedly, without drama, is more powerful than control, because control breaks under pressure. Recovery adapts. So here's the question I want you to leave with. The next time something goes wrong, not if, when. How quickly will you return? Not perfectly, just honestly. Because your future is not built on perfect months. It's built on how fast you get back on track, after imperfect ones. That's the difference. And once you master that, nothing can fully knock you off course again. Conclusion. At the beginning of this journey, you were trying to solve a problem. Something wasn't working. You were earning, but not progressing. Trying, but not stabilizing. Hoping, but not arriving. And now, if you've stayed with this, you can see it differently. Not as a personal failure, but as a structural one. Because the truth is simple. You were never taught how money actually works after it arrives. You were taught how to earn it, not how to direct it. And that gap is where most people spend their entire lives, working harder, earning more, yet somehow feeling the same. Now you understand why. Because a salary does not create stability. A system does. And everything we've built together comes back to that. You've seen how money behaves without direction, how it drifts, how it disappears quietly into habits, convenience, and emotion. You've seen how income alone doesn't fix instability. It often amplifies it. You've seen why your nervous system matters, why unpredictability creates stress, why structure creates calm. You've seen the importance of building a floor before chasing a ceiling, of protecting your margin before expanding your lifestyle, of creating buffers so life stops resetting your progress. You've seen the difference between saving and building cash flow, between working harder and building leverage, between chasing more and defining enough. And maybe most importantly, you've seen that this is not just about money. It's about identity, about becoming someone who designs instead of reacts, who builds instead of copes, who thinks in systems instead of moments. Because once that shift happens, everything else follows. Now let's bring this back to something simple. I call this the 3-year decision, because that's the real time frame most people avoid thinking about. Not next month, not next year. 3 years. If nothing changes about your current system, where will you be? Not where you hope, where your current patterns are actually taking you. That answer matters, because most people don't fail financially in dramatic ways. They drift, slowly, quietly, until one day, they realize years have passed and nothing is different. But here's the part that changes everything. The same is true in the opposite direction. If you build a system, even a simple one, and you maintain it for 3 years, your life will not look the same. Not because of one big breakthrough, because of compounding. Small decisions, repeated monthly. Building something beneath the surface, a buffer, a habit, a structure, an identity, until one day, it becomes visible. And more importantly, it becomes stable. Now here's where most people get this wrong. They think transformation comes from intensity, from doing everything at once, from overhauling their entire life in a moment of motivation. It doesn't. Transformation comes from consistency, from doing one thing and continuing to do it, even when it feels small, even when it feels slow, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Because something is happening. You just can't see it yet. That's the nature of compounding. Now, before you leave this, I want you to do one thing. Not 10. Not a full plan. 1. Write down one structural change you will make this week. Something real. Something simple. An automatic transfer. A buffer account. A rule you will follow every time money arrives. A decision you've been avoiding that you will finally make. Just one. Because this is where most people lose everything. Not in understanding, in implementation. They learn, they agree, they feel motivated, and then they do nothing. And slowly, it fades. Don't let that happen. Because the gap between knowing and doing is where your future is decided. Not dramatically, quietly. In small choices you either follow through on or don't. And here's the final truth. Financial freedom is not a number. It's not a certain income. It's not a milestone you reach and suddenly everything feels different. It's something much simpler. It's a life where money is no longer loud, where bills don't create panic, where decisions aren't made from pressure, where your mind is not constantly occupied by what if. It's a nervous system that feels calm, a structure that supports you, a life where money does its job without demanding your constant attention. And that is available to you. Not instantly, not easily, but reliably, if you build it. So the question is no longer, can this work? The question is, will I stay with it long enough for it to work? Because the system is not something you follow, it's something you become. And 3 years from now, you will either be living inside the results of that system or still wondering why things never changed. That decision starts now.